The Chargers' injury situation is getting worse, and Justin Herbert is finally speaking about it. 3 players went down in one practice, including the center brought in to protect him, while other key starters are already battling injuries, but that's only half the story. Let's get into it. It took 7 plays. Just 7. That's all it took for the Chargers' new $30 million center to end up face down on the turf at the Bolt on a Tuesday morning that was supposed to be a measuring stick moment against the 49ers. It only took 7 reps for a key Chargers offensive lineman to go down. On the 7th play of that morning's joint practice, Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert threw a pass downfield to receiver Johnston, who made a heck of a grab while also being interfered with by 49ers cornerback Diomedor Lenoir. Everybody was still looking downfield, celebrating the catch. Nobody was looking at the pile near the line of scrimmage. While everyone was celebrating downfield, the training staff rushed to Disastrous, who was on the ground in pain and favoring his left leg. The play that got the highlight wasn't the play that mattered. During the play to Johnston, left guard Coyote Awosika blocked 49ers defensive lineman Sebastian Valdez into Diasash's leg. One blocking assignment, one bad angle, and the middle of the Chargers' offensive line was gone. The Chargers center was helped up by 2 trainers and onto the cart. As he sat on it, Diasach hit the cart 3 times in frustration. That's not a guy nursing a tweak. That's a guy who knows exactly what a cart means in August. Center Tyler Diasach had his head down as he was carted into the facility, and Herbert didn't stay in the pocket admiring his own throw. Herbert and multiple players came over to offer their support. Obviously praying for the best, Herbert said after practice. 4 words, no speech, no spin, just a quarterback standing over a lineman he'd known for exactly 1 training camp, hoping it wasn't as bad as it looked. It got worse before it got better. Diasach wasn't the last name added to the injury list that morning. Johnston joined a growing list of Chargers players who left practice injured. The list also includes starting center Tyler Diasach and linebacker Kyle Kennard. 3 players, 3 different injuries, 1 practice. Center Tyler Diasach, linebacker Kyle Kennard, and wide receiver Johnston all sustained injuries during the session at the Chargers facility in El Segundo, CA. Johnston's exit had its own story. The young wide receiver left Tuesday's practice after coming up limping following a play. He worked with a trainer on the sideline with what appeared to be a lower body injury. Reports described it as Johnston coming up limping after attempting a leaping catch on the sideline, with trainers working on him for what appeared to be a lower body injury. He'd just made a contested grab against Lenoir moments before Diasach went down. So by the time he was limping, the field already had 1 player on a cart. Then Kennard edge rusher Kyle Kennard also suffered an injury and was taken out of practice, with reports simply noting the outside linebacker limped out of practice with a trainer. Kennard also limped out of the field with a trainer after suffering a lower body injury, with specific details and severity of the injury remaining unknown. 3 separate carts, 3 separate trainers, 1 practice field. Adam Schefter put the names out within minutes of each other, and by the time the session ended, the Chargers weren't talking about a strong showing against a playoff caliber defense anymore. They were talking about a training room that suddenly had a line out the door. The internet noticed the pattern fast. Fans started connecting it to something they'd already seen from the other sideline. The injuries affecting only a team and the concentration of them in a single practice session immediately got a lot of reactions from NFL fans, many quickly connecting the incidents to the 49ers' recent struggle with injuries as the regular season approaches. Except this time it wasn't the 49ers piling up bodies. It was the team that flew up from El Segundo expecting a tune-up. By the numbers, it read like a disaster. As the Chargers and 49ers engaged in a joint practice in Los Angeles, center Tyler Diasach got carted off with an injury, and wide receiver Johnston and outside linebacker Kyle Kennard both left practice with injuries. One headline even called it the least fortunate session of the entire training camp. And in the middle of it stood Herbert, the same quarterback who was slicing up the 49ers secondary just plays earlier, now watching his supporting cast get peeled away man by man. That's the part that makes this different from a routine camp update. This isn't a backup getting dinged in a walkthrough. This is the starting center the team just paid, the top pass rusher off the edge, and a receiver Herbert is counting on as one of his top targets. All going down in the same session, with Herbert standing right there, watching each one leave the field. To understand why Diasach going down mattered so much, you have to go back to why he was there in the first place. The Chargers didn't draft this problem. They spent real money trying to fix it. Before the start of free agency, the Bolts signed former Washington Commanders center Tyler Biadaches to a 3-year, $30 million deal to replace Bradley Bozeman, who retired after 2025 and was graded the worst center in the league by Pro Football Focus. That's not a depth signing, that's a team looking at its offensive line grades from the year before, seeing a hole in the middle and going out to buy a starter specifically to protect its franchise quarterback. And Biadache wasn't some journeyman gamble either. Biadache has a good track record of being healthy throughout his career, missing just 9 games across 6 seasons. With the offensive lineman missing 4 games in his rookie season, he was durable. He was supposed to be the boring, reliable piece. Then a defensive tackle's body weight landed on his knee in 11-on-11s, and all of that track record stopped mattering. Chris Rim of ESPN reported that center Tyler Biadaches got injured during Tuesday's practice, with the medical cart out for Chargers center Tyler Biadache, who went down after 49ers defensive tackle Sebastian Valdez fell on his left knee during 11v11. There are no updates on the extent of the injury, but a cart coming out for a knee is never the outcome anybody in that building wanted to see. Los Angeles had just signed him this offseason to shore up the middle of the offensive line for Herbert, and now the unit's cohesion is at a minimum. Regardless of whether or not Biadache or Slater returns soon, it is extremely concerning that there's so much chaos on the offensive line with a few more weeks until the regular season begins. Here's where it gets worse. Biadache wasn't the only lineman the Chargers were already worried about. Left tackle Rashawn Slater, the guy protecting Herbert's blindside, had been in and out of camp for weeks with something the team wouldn't fully explain. To make matters worse, left tackle Rashawn Slater has missed half of training camp due to injury. Slater's situation had already turned into its own slow burn story before Biadache ever went down. He tore his patella tendon during the previous year's camp, an injury that ended his season before it began. Slater suffered a torn patella tendon injury a year ago during the 2025 training camp, which effectively ended his season. So every twinge since has been treated like a 5-alarm fire, even when the team insisted it wasn't related. Head coach Jim Harbaugh called it minor muscle-related and not related to the patella in a press conference addressing Slater's absence. But the explanations kept shifting. Harbaugh told reporters that Slater is working through something, not worried about it. Even though Harbaugh had previously said it was a muscle issue and unrelated to the serious injury the star offensive tackle suffered last year. During a weekly media meet around the same time, Slater had described it himself as a tweak of the knee. Muscle issue, knee tweak, working through something. 3 different descriptions for one player who protects Herbert's backside, and none of it inspired much confidence heading into a season where the Chargers can't afford another lost tackle. So when Biadache went down too, it wasn't an isolated event. It landed on top of an offensive line that was already patched together with question marks. The Chargers had both bookend tackles back healthy and participating in practice after season-ending leg injuries in left tackle Rashawn Slater and right tackle Joe Alt before this latest round of injuries. With the rash of injuries the Chargers experienced last season and Herbert finishing as the most hit quarterback in the league in 2025, the important thing for the Chargers was creating positional flexibility through the offensive line room by generating experienced, functional depth. That plan got tested in real time the moment Biadache hit the turf. The team turned immediately to the rookie they drafted specifically to be an insurance policy. Unlike in years past, they appear prepared for a situation like this. The Chargers drafted center Jake Slater in the 3rd round of the draft. After Biadache went down, Slater stepped in at center and believed there was a mix of good and bad. He was thrust into the first-team offense after taking most of his reps with the second team because Biadache had been the starter. The rookie didn't pretend it was easy. "I'd just take it as a blessing that I can help the team in any way I can," Slater said. But the tape wasn't kind in every rep. During a 2-minute offensive drill, Slater was beaten cleanly by 49ers defensive lineman Osa Odighizuwa, who was a wrecking ball all practice long regardless of who lined up against him. Still, there were flashes. Slater did have 2 good reps in the run game, so there is something to build on. And Herbert, the guy who has to trust whoever's snapping him the ball, gave his young center a genuine compliment afterward. "I thought he did great to be able to step in as quickly as he did," Herbert said of Slater. "He's got a great feel for the offense, moves quickly, he's a great pass protector. That's not just coach speak. That's a starting quarterback publicly vouching for the guy who might be starting for him in week 1 if the Biodash injury lingers. While the offensive line was unraveling, the other injury that mattered most to Herbert personally was standing on the sideline getting looked at by a trainer. Quentin Johnston wasn't just another body in the joint practice. He was becoming one of Herbert's most trusted targets heading into the season. The numbers back that up. He logged 51 receptions for 735 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns in 2025. That's real production, and it came in a receiving core that was still figuring itself out. Johnston will be one of Justin Herbert's primary targets, alongside Ladd McConkey, Trey Harris, and Oronde Gadsden. So watching him limp off, even in a training camp practice that means nothing on a scoreboard, mattered. The young wide receiver left Tuesday's practice after coming up limping following a play, working with a trainer on the sideline with what appeared to be a lower body injury. The good news, at least early on, was that it didn't look catastrophic. Fortunately, Johnston's injury does not look to be major based on how LA's training staff responded to the situation. Still, Johnston, the 2023 first-round pick, did attempt to return to the field. That's Herbert's guy trying to walk it off and get back out there in the same practice he got hurt in. It's the kind of moment that tells you what the locker room values, even when the team is careful about revealing the full diagnosis. The caution stuck around in the days that followed. He's a first-round pick the team is building around, and the injury could still linger into the regular season, even if it isn't considered serious. If anything, Quentin Johnston could be lined up to miss the preseason game against the San Francisco 49ers, as a precaution in case his knock develops into something more serious. Johnston himself had already been talking before any of this about trying to take the next step in his career. Just continue to come up here, go through the plays, go through the workouts, and hope for the best at that point, Johnston said when entering year 4 via the Chargers. I'm not going to say I do it differently, but some of the routes just working on timing as far as out of break stuff. Just getting my head around with different stuff quicker. That's a guy trying to sharpen the details of his game right before a lower body injury threatened to slow that whole process down. This wasn't Johnston's first appearance on the injury report that camp either. Just days before the joint practice, he'd been held out entirely alongside 2 other core Chargers. Jim Harbaugh said Quentin Johnston, Tahib Still, and Rashawn Slater won't practice on a prior day, saying Johnston and Still were dealing with something minor. So this camp had already been chipping away at him before the 49ers practice added another injury to the file. Kyle Kennard's situation carried a different kind of weight. He wasn't a household name to casual fans, but inside the building, he'd quietly been one of the best-looking players in camp leading up to that Tuesday. Kyle Kennard had perhaps his best practice of camp, with several impressive wins in one-on-ones and pressures during 11-on-11 periods in the days before his injury. A pass rusher who was trending up, suddenly limping off with a lower body issue in the same session that took out the center and the receiver. Edge rusher Kyle Kennard also suffered an injury and was taken out of practice, with a trainer noting OLB Kyle Kennard just limped out of practice with a trainer. 3 players, 3 different position groups, 3 different roles Herbert relies on. The man snapping him the ball, the man catching his passes, and a defender who wasn't on his side of the ball, but represented one more crack in a roster that was supposed to arrive at the regular season hole. The broader context made the whole scene feel less like bad luck and more like a pattern the Chargers couldn't shake. The Chargers have been dealing with a recent wave of injuries after initially starting off-season training relatively healthy. Among the notable injured were tackle Rashawn Slater, first-round pick Archie Mesidor, and wide receiver Trey Harris. Before this latest round hit, Biodash, Kennard, and Johnston. Mesidor's situation added another layer. He was the team's newest first-round investment on the defensive line, and he simply wasn't on the field. Also not practicing was 2026 first-round draft pick Akeem Mesidor, who had missed the last 3 practices for the Bolts. A rookie the front office spent a premium pick on, watching from the sideline while veterans around him went down one after another. Even the running back room had its own scare heading into camp, months before Biodash ever hit the turf. One of the main topics of discussion was the injury to veteran running back Najee Harris, who suffered an eye wound during a fireworks accident a few weeks prior to camp. It's a strange footnote now, but it set the tone. This was a Chargers camp that kept finding new ways to lose bodies before the games that counted even started. If there's one person whose press conferences have become their own genre of confusion, it's Jim Harbaugh. Every time a reporter asks for specifics on an injury, the answer sounds like it was written to say as little as possible while still sounding calm. Take Slater over the course of just a few weeks. Harbaugh called the same absence a rest day, then a muscle issue, then something he wouldn't define at all. Just a ramp up, Harbaugh said at one point, according to Eric Smith of Chargers.com. He's right on schedule, going by the book and what the doctors and trainers have laid out. Then days later, after another absence cleared, the amount of reps he can do consecutively is 2, now it's 3, now it's continuing to go up, Harbaugh said. It's counting reps in single digits for one of the most important offensive linemen on the roster, weeks before the season opener. That's the level of caution the Chargers are operating under with Slater, and it tells you everything about how fragile they know that line already is, even before Biadasz went down on top of it. Harbaugh's answer style isn't new, and reporters covering the team have noticed the pattern repeat itself. Harbaugh's Chargers love to be mysterious about injuries, and this wasn't any different. Vague on Slater, vague on Johnston, and still being out with something minor. And then when Najee Harris was dealing with his own eye injury going into the same camp, Harbaugh again kept things loose. Jim Harbaugh said Najee Harris was healing and doing everything he could to get back on the field. But Harbaugh said he didn't know if Harris would be back for training camp. That's the environment Herbert operates in. He's the starting quarterback of a team where the head coach won't give a straight answer about who's going to be blocking for him next week, and he still has to walk into the media room and sound like everything's under control. And to be fair to Herbert, he's been through this exact cycle before, just usually as the one getting hurt, not the one watching everyone else go down. Go back to the previous season and you'll find him breaking a bone in his hand against the Raiders, finishing the game anyway. Los Angeles Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert sustained a break in his left hand during the team's game against the Las Vegas Raiders and was able to finish the game. Thankfully for Herbert, the injury was in his non-throwing hand, making his speedy return from surgery more feasible. He talked about that recovery the same way he talks about everything. Brief, practical, no drama. Just getting the swelling down, Herbert said. That's been the most important thing the past couple days of getting back. Acclimated, getting it moving, and doing everything I can to be out there. Before that, there was the ankle. He said his ankle had been getting sore throughout the game, but after the sack, the pain intensified. Harbaugh actually pulled him from that one, describing it in his own blunt way. I've been in that position before. Warriors, you give them the shot, Harbaugh said, adding that Herbert wouldn't go back into the game even if he asked, because Justin's the kind of guy you got to pull back, because you're never going to have to talk him into anything, but he does have to be pulled back. That reputation for toughness follows Herbert everywhere, and other players around the league keep bringing it up unprompted. Justin broke his hand yesterday. He left the game for one series and came back in, and now he's getting surgery on his hand. Former quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick said on a podcast with edge rusher Kyle Van Noy, who played with Herbert on the Chargers, the amount of toughness that he's displayed over the course of his career, we can check that box, Fitzpatrick added. Even Hall of Famer Steve Young weighed in on why that matters beyond just Herbert individually. If your quarterback doesn't have that toughness, Young told the LA Times, it slowly starts to erode the locker room. So when Herbert stood over Biadasz on that cart, or complimented Slater for stepping in cold, or said he was praying for the best, that's coming from a guy whose own body has been through the ringer for years, who understands exactly what it means when a lineman hits the cart 3 times in frustration. He's not performing sympathy, he's speaking from a place that's uncomfortably familiar. So where does this actually leave the Chargers, and where does it leave Herbert specifically heading into the parts of the calendar that count? The line situation is still very much unresolved. Biadasz's exact injury hadn't been fully disclosed in the immediate aftermath, and the team was still waiting on results. The Chargers now await the results to determine what Biadasz's future holds this season. If it's serious, that $30 million answer to last year's worst graded center in the league turns into a problem all over again, right as the season is about to start. If it's minor, the Chargers dodge a bullet, but they've already burned depth reps proving they can survive without him. Slater's situation remains just as murky. Nobody outside the building seems to have a full handle on what exactly he's playing through, and the team has shown no urgency to clarify it beyond saying he's on schedule. That leaves Herbert's blind side as an open question mark walking into the regular season, regardless of how the Biadasz situation resolves. Johnston's outlook is a little more settled, at least for now. The early signs pointed toward caution rather than crisis, the kind of injury that gets you held out of a pre-season game rather than out of the season. It appears that shouldn't be too much of an issue, though Johnston could be lined up to miss the pre-season game against the San Francisco 49ers as a precaution, in case his knock develops into something more serious. That's a name Herbert will want back on the field quickly, given how much the passing game leans on him alongside McConkey, Harris, and Gadsden. Kennard's status remained the least clear of the three. He'd been playing some of his best football of the entire camp right up until the moment he limped off, and there's a real cost to a pass rusher losing reps at exactly the point his game was clicking. None of these injuries individually threatens to derail the season. Camps see soft tissue injuries every August, and most players in this story are expected to be fine by the time games matter. But stacking 3 significant injuries into one practice on top of an offensive line that already had a starting tackle on a modified rep count is the kind of thing that turns a hopeful camp into a nervous one. The Chargers cannot afford to have many more practices like this one, especially with the regular season coming up. Hopefully, LA gets some positive injury updates on these players later this week. For Herbert personally, the stakes are layered. He's stepping into a new offense under a new coordinator, trying to build chemistry with weapons that keep rotating off the field before he can lock in real timing with them. With new offensive coordinator Mike McDaniel in town, the Chargers quarterback looks set to be unleashed. But that only works if the pieces around him stay upright long enough to run the plays. And there's the matter of Herbert's own recent history that hovers over every injury update the team puts out. He didn't just talk about somebody else's injury this camp, he's the guy who played through a broken hand, a sprained ankle, and enough bumps and bruises that reporters openly track how many games he's missed compared to how many he probably should have missed. Herbert finished as the most hit quarterback in the league in 2025, which is exactly the kind of stat that makes every single injury around him, center, receiver, pass rusher, tackle, feel like it's connected to the same larger question: can this team build enough protection and enough depth to keep its franchise quarterback upright for a full 16 games? That question doesn't get answered in a joint practice against the 49ers in August, but the answer starts getting written right there, on a field in El Segundo, with a rookie center getting thrown into the fire, a receiver testing his legs on the sideline, and a quarterback standing in the middle of it all, watching, praying, and still showing up the next day to throw the ball anyway. The Chargers have the roster to be dangerous this season. Whether they have the health to prove it is the story that's still being written, one practice at a time.